Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to talk about conscription, and I'm going to talk about what your options are in relation to conscription. And I'm illustrating options. I am not recommending actions. I am going to give my opinion about conscription. I'm going to give my opinion about government and governments in general. But ultimately, what you do with this information is up to you, because it's your life's journey. It is. Your soul's having an experience here on Earth, and it's up to you to decide what you want to do with it. Now, I can say with all certainty, all forms of involuntary servitude are immoral. That includes chattel slavery. That includes indentured servitude. That includes debt slavery. That includes military slavery, aka conscription, but also civilian slavery, as in being conscripted, forced labor for the state to serve military purposes, or even to serve civic purposes. All of these types of compulsory involuntary servitude are wrong, and when done by the state, it is, I would call it, demonic. Yes, demonic is a good term. Now, the governments of the earth, they're all evil, every single one. Some are more evil than others, some are less evil than others, depending on what things they're doing. And so we are approaching World War III, and the governments of the earth are going to try to conscript their population into military and probably compulsory civilian service. And it's evil. So, how do you want to respond to it? Now, people like Professor Jiang, whatever wisdom he may have about geopolitical events, says you either show up or you go to prison. So, what are you going to do, huh? A lot of people say that, right? I had a choice between the draft or prison, so I chose the draft, right? Now, there are more than two choices. That is a false dichotomy. Some say there's nowhere to run and there's nowhere to hide. Yes, there is. That's propaganda. It's more difficult in the modern age than, say, even 50 years ago. That is for sure, with all the surveillance technology out, and with electronic transactions and ID tracking and all these things. But there are more than two options. Either you show up when you're called, or you go to prison. So let's talk about the options, okay? I'm going to talk about the options and the consequences of your choices. Okay, that's what life is. Life's full of choices with consequences. Now, suppose there is a draft. Okay. You receive a letter in the mail and it says you need to show up at the enlistment office and by this date, or a warrant will be issued for your arrest. Okay. You could choose to show up, right? And you could choose to participate in military service to the best of your ability. That is a choice you could make. And the potential consequences of that is you might actually have a fairly comfortable situation compared to a lot of people you knew. You'll probably get 3 meals a day, probably 3 lousy meals a day, but 3 meals a day and a place to sleep if you're in a support or office position. You also might end up in an infantry position, and consequences of that is you may be shot by enemy soldiers, or hit with a grenade, or hit with a missile, or a drone may explode over your head. You could get captured by the enemy. You could get captured and tortured. You may have to shoot enemy soldiers who come from a nation that, before you were at the war, never did anything wrong to you. And you'd have to live with your conscience knowing that you willingly served this demonic entity called the state to the best of your ability. You could also, as an option, you could show up when you're drafted, and instead of serving to the best of your ability, you could serve to the worst of your ability. And of course, there are consequences of that, right? The consequences to you may be that if they find out you're serving to the worst of your ability, you may end up in prison, you may end up executed, you may end up dishonorably discharged, and when you get home, your neighbors who worship the state, which is the bulk of humanity at this time. In fact, I would say the great spiritual evil of our time is worship of the state. But if you're listening to this right now, you're probably considering transcending that great evil. So that is consequence of doing your worst work rather than your best work. Now, let's say you're a conscientious objector and say, okay, we're going to assign you to a civilian work detail. Maybe you have to work on a factory. Maybe you have to be a paper shuffler. Maybe you have to do this. Maybe you have to do that. Whatever it is. Okay, you could do that to the best of your ability. And you'd have to do that knowing that, okay, you were willingly, enthusiastically engaging in material support of this evil called the state as it wages a war that's going to end the lives of a lot of people. You'd be willingly, enthusiastically helping them probably to enact an even more oppressive surveillance state than already exists. You could also, if you are assigned to civilian work duty, you could also do that to the worst of your ability. And of course, the OSS guide that was published in 1944, I will link to it in the description, has all kinds of interesting ideas which may be applicable to doing your worst possible work as a involuntary civilian slave of the state. Or in the words of Oscar Schindler, insert now.
I'll call around, find out where we can buy shells. Pass them off as ours.
I don't see the difference. Whether they're made here or somewhere else.
Don't see a difference? I see a
Well,
difference.
you'll lose a lot of money, that's the
Fewer
difference.
shells will be made.
Not that.
Stan, if this factory ever produces a shell that can actually be fired, I'll be very unhappy.
Well, what else there to say about it, right? Now, another choice you could make is you could choose to be a fugitive from justice. Or rather, I would put a fugitive from injustice. Nonetheless, the state will be looking for you because you didn't show up. Now, one could be passively disobedient to it, right? One could be passively disobedient and say, well, when they come to arrest me, I'm just going to willingly go to prison. And that is a choice you could make, right? You could just be living out your life as long as you can, and then eventually armed thugs with badges and uniforms will grab you and drag you off for a trial and imprisonment. Now, you could spend a great deal of time in prison, and prisons are, while I think they are unjust institutions, they are filled with some pretty nasty characters, and no doubt, if you're a gentle-spirited person, you may have a hard time being incarcerated with them. And being a gentle-spirited person, you might have to do things to keep yourself safe that might end up extending your sentence. And that sucks, but that is life. And while incarcerated, of course, you might be forced to labor for the regime, in which case you could either do your best work or you could do your worst work, as per what I've described before. Now, if you choose to be a fugitive, you could also choose to be an active fugitive, which means you could choose to actively evade the regime. And instead of just going about your normal life, you disappear. And to disappear, you might have to study the habits of the criminal class. Because right now, the criminal class try to live a kind of amorphous existence. They don't like to be detected. They live double lives. If you go to any convenience store in the evening, you will find some of these people. That's where they shop for their sustenance because they're less surveilled. You don't necessarily have to show ID. So if there's a hue and cry for so-and-so and so-and-so, well, you're not going to be identified for it, at least for now. That might change, though. You could choose to hide. And yeah, there's surveillance everywhere. Like I said, we have a surveillance state that's probably going to get worse, but you could choose to try to evade the state. And a lot of people don't even consider this because they don't have the skills to do so, right? We are domesticated creatures. We're taught to just go to work, earn the money, and then buy the things. Right? To use a metaphor, you could have 100 people working in a pencil factory, but not a single one knows how to make a pencil from start to finish. They all make a component of the pencil. So, you would have to learn how to find food and clothing and water and how to provide for your own security. I mean, if you're evading the state, you can't very well call the police if you feel like there's a threat to your safety. You can't very well call the fire department if your domicile is on fire. You can't very well go to the hospital if you're injured. All these people will want your identification. And yeah, if you are captured for evading the state, eventually they catch up with you, and then you may be put on trial, and you may go to prison, and your neighbors, most of whom worship the state, may well consider you not welcome in polite company for the rest of your life. That being said, once incarcerated, they may well try to compel you to labor, in which case you could do your best work, or you could do your worst work. Your other option you have, and it's an option, I'm not saying I recommend it, but it is an option. The world is full of options, is that you could become a rebel. Yeah, and as a rebel, you might actively resist the regime. There are consequences of that, especially in a time of war. It may be considered treasonous. If you are caught and convicted, you may well be executed or serve a very, very long prison sentence, with all the consequences of being a person in that situation. Each man and woman has to make decisions based on their conscience, okay? So let me just tell you my conscience on this subject. I think all the governments of the earth are demonic. They're evil. They don't deserve our obedience. Okay? Any obedience I give to them is a tactical consideration, nothing more. I stop at stop signs because it's probably a good idea at an intersection that you can't see which way people are coming from. It's a good idea to stop and take a look. But absolutely, if someone blows a stop sign and there's not even a near miss, was there really a crime? No, I'm not advocating blowing stop signs, but I'm saying that no harm was done, not even a near miss, not even a near harm, not even the risk of harm. Just, hey, someone's rolling down the street, runs through the stop sign, and life goes on. There's been a few times in my life, 3 or 4, where I just wasn't paying attention and I blew a stop sign, or I blew a traffic light. And there wasn't even a near miss. Nobody got harmed, and here I am being all anxious about it. But in reality, I didn't do anything wrong. So, the state is the great evil of our time. I think serving the state is wrong. I'm too old, and I'm too frail, and I'm too many illnesses and injuries to actually even be a military conscript. And if I were a civilian conscript, well, I wouldn't show up. And if somehow they grabbed me and compelled me into, I don't know, sweeping a floor somewhere, I would be the least efficient floor sweeper you've ever met. And they'll be, oh gosh, we gotta give him something else to do. Like, I know, let's have him, change tires over here. Oh, well, man, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just so clumsy with this wrench here, Yeah, exactly. I don't know why the tires kept popping off. I tightened the lug nuts, right? I used the torque wrench, whatever. Okay, that would be me if I were conscripted. Okay, but what you choose to do is your own business. Okay, but what we have worldwide is the nations of the earth are trying to thin out the population, especially the population of young men, who are going to be really angry when there's not enough food or wealth to go around, right? They don't want lots of angry men, because angry men tear down civilizations. They tear down governments. All right. And Professor, I also want to address Professor Jiang too, when he says,
is coming. But not only that, but I believe that the draft is coming to many countries, including Canada, Australia, Europe. And you think that the purpose of a draft is to fight a war. But you think about it deeply, the purpose of a draft is to reorganize society in a certain way. So in America today, what do young men do? Well, they buy Bitcoin, they gamble online, they're on OnlyFans, they don't want to work because the pay is too low, and this is a disaster for the country.
these young men, what are they do in your civilization? They're all buying and selling crypto. They don't want to work. I'm like, you know what? I can see that the elite class think that just making money off of their money is their privilege. But when the average guy gets in on it, you got to do something about it. You got to impoverish everyone so that he has to go to work, right? Big old fuck you to Professor Jiang. I hope he... I mean that. He should never have said that, and I would never raise a hand against him, but what a terrible thing to say.
Do whatever they want. They're just going to play video games, spend all their money on OnlyFans, and gamble everything on Bitcoin, okay? And they don't really know anything useful. So this is a huge problem, and that's why they need a national draft to fix this problem. So should you run away if there's a draft? I already told you there's no place to run to, okay? Either you go to a nation which is a draft, or you go to a nation which has even worse problems like famine, okay?
This man, Professor Jiang, went to Yale. He's not dumb. And because he went to Yale, he is totally sus, in my opinion. Yale's a pipeline for bringing people into the deep state, the CIA and whatnot. So is he an agent of the Chinese government? Is he an agent of the American government? Well, both, because only on one layer, China and the United States are rivals, but on a higher layer, they're not. This is a managed stage production. He's part of that. His job is to get you to consume 85% truth with 15% propaganda. And the propaganda is that we're heading towards a managed civilization where the state forces you to do what you're supposed to do because you need to be told what to do. And there's nowhere to run. Well, you know what? I don't have a Yale education. I don't have a college degree at all. And I just spoke at length about all the various options you have. All of them with consequences, for good or for bad. It's not just, well, you either report to the draft or not. So, I don't trust him. And I don't trust anyone who says there's only two choices. You either show up or you go to jail. No, there's more than that. Most of the choices that you pursue, if you don't show up, may lead you to jail or worse. But you do have a choice. But it's up to you. Thank you for watching.